Adolf Hitler didn't think he was evil. He thought he was saving civilization. He thought he was a misunderstood genius, a visionary born into the wrong era, a man destiny had chosen for a purpose that ordinary people couldn't comprehend. This is not a defense. This is a diagnosis, because the most dangerous thing about Hitler wasn't his ideology. It was the specific psychological architecture that made him capable of believing it, and convincing millions of others to believe it too. Today, we're going inside that architecture, not to understand him, to understand how it happens. Historians and psychologists have debated Hitler's psychology for decades. The most consistent clinical assessment, based on extensive analysis of his writings, speeches, behavior, and testimony from those around him, points to a cluster of overlapping conditions: narcissistic personality disorder, paranoid personality disorder, elements of psychopathy. But here's the important distinction. These are not excuses. They are mechanisms. Understanding how a lock works doesn't mean you approve of what was behind the door. It means you know how to recognize the same lock on a different door. Start with the narcissism, because everything else builds on it. Narcissistic personality disorder at the grandiose end is not simply arrogance. It is a complete restructuring of reality around the self as the central, irreplaceable figure. Hitler showed every clinical marker: an unshakable belief in his own exceptional destiny, present from early adulthood, long before any real achievement justified it. Twice rejected from art school, unemployed, living in shelters, and still utterly convinced he was a genius history would recognize. Psychologists call this grandiosity without foundation. The self-image exists entirely independently of external reality. Add to this an inability to tolerate criticism, explosive rage at contradiction, a need for absolute loyalty and total agreement from everyone around him, and a pattern of idealization followed by devaluation. People were either completely loyal or they were traitors. There was no middle ground. This is textbook narcissistic architecture, and it made him immune to feedback at exactly the moments when feedback was most critical. Layer 2, the paranoia. Paranoid personality disorder is characterized by pervasive distrust, the belief that others are fundamentally hostile, conspiring, threatening. For Hitler, this manifested in one of the most well-documented ways in modern history: the belief that a single group, Jewish people, was the hidden force behind every failure, every humiliation, every obstacle in his life and in Germany's history. Psychologists call this externalizing attribution, the systematic redirection of all negative outcomes onto an identified external enemy. It is the paranoid mind's solution to unbearable reality. Germany lost the war? Not Germany's fault. Betrayal from within. His career failed? Not his fault. The system was rigged against people like him. Every defeat, every humiliation, every frustration had an explanation, and that explanation was always someone else. The paranoia didn't make him dangerous alone. It made him dangerous because it gave the narcissism a target. Here's the layer that explains how it started. Hitler's childhood was marked by a brutal, unpredictable father. Documented accounts describe violent beatings, humiliation, and an atmosphere of constant fear. Psychologists who have studied his early life note a pattern consistent with what we now call complex trauma: chronic exposure to threat from an attachment figure with no safe escape. The psychological consequences are well documented: hypervigilance, difficulty with emotional regulation, a deep need for control, and, critically, the development of a split worldview. The world divides into absolute categories: safe or dangerous, loyal or threatening, pure or contaminated. There is no complexity, no nuance, no gray. This black and white cognitive style, combined with the narcissism and paranoia, created a mind that was completely certain, completely inflexible, and completely immune to contradiction. Certainty at that level is not a strength. It is a pathology. Here's the mechanism that made it all possible at scale. Hitler was not a backroom schemer who seized power through force alone. He was genuinely compelling to millions of people. His oratory activated something deep in human psychology: the need for certainty in uncertain times, the need for an enemy to explain suffering, the need for a leader who seemed to have absolute conviction. Psychologist Robert Cialdini's work on influence identifies several of the specific mechanisms Hitler deployed with devastating effectiveness. Social proof. Everyone around you believes this. Scarcity. Civilization itself is under threat. Authority. I alone understand what is happening. Commitment and consistency. Once you've taken one step, it's easier to take the next. But here's what's most psychologically important. The charisma worked because the audience was primed. Post-war Germany, humiliated, economically devastated, socially destabilized, had a population whose threat detection systems were in overdrive. A brain under sustained threat is a brain looking for certainty. Hitler provided it. The conditions created the audience. The psychology created the performance, and together, they created history's most documented catastrophe. Here's the part that is most relevant to us today. Hitler didn't seize power overnight. The psychology of his rise was gradual, incremental, each step normalized by the one before. Psychologists call this the foot-in-the-door effect at civilizational scale. Each small concession made the next, slightly larger concession feel acceptable. Each dehumanization of a target group made the next, slightly more extreme dehumanization feel like a continuation of something already established. The population didn't collectively decide to participate in atrocity. They made 1,000 small decisions, each of which felt, in isolation, like a reasonable response to the current situation. By the time the full picture was visible, the psychological investment was too large to reverse. This is not unique to Nazi Germany. This is how mass psychology works under sustained authoritarian pressure. The mechanism is the same. The variables are different. So here's what a psychological profile of Hitler actually tells us. Not that he was a uniquely evil monster who emerged from nowhere, but that he was the product of specific psychological mechanisms: grandiose narcissism, paranoid externalizing, complex trauma, and extraordinary rhetorical talent, operating inside specific social conditions that amplified everything. The uncomfortable truth is this: none of these mechanisms are unique to him. The narcissism that couldn't tolerate criticism, the paranoia that needed an enemy, the trauma that created absolute thinking, the charisma that exploited fear. These exist. They reappear in different people, different contexts, different scales. The study of Hitler's psychology is not an exercise in understanding one man. It is a study in the conditions that produce such men, and in the psychological vulnerabilities, in populations, in institutions, in individuals that allow them to rise. History doesn't repeat, but the psychology does.